Louise Palmer Masterton is founder of the award-winning vegan restaurant STEM and Glory. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Richard. Nice to meet you.
And you. We are in the month of January, which is veganery. Yes, that's what they call it.
That's what they've called it since, I think, 2013, which was the first year. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's been about that long.
That's right. My first question is about your restaurant. It's amazing. I read that it raised £350,000 through crowdfunding in just 5 hours. And when I read that, my reaction was, wow, how did that happen?
It's like a magic science, crowdfunding. We actually, our target was 350,000 that we raised within 5 hours of going live. We actually closed the round having raised 610,000. And that was for our flagship site, which we opened in London in January 2019. But crowdfunding is an epic journey, and we're actually about to launch our next crowdfund, our biggest one to date, actually, which is to fund our next restaurant, also in London, at London's Broadgate, hopefully opening in April 22.
Wow, that's fantastic. Have you always been vegan?
Well, I gave up eating meat on the spot when I was a teenager, and that was it. I have not eaten animal products since then.
And what caused you? Because it's like terrible for the climate for us to eat meat, and also terrible for us to eat meat because they're animals.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I'm of a certain age now. When I was a teenager, the whole climate argument just wasn't present. Neither was the health argument, really. So you were vegan for the animals. That was the only thing. I mean, what tipped me over into it is I had a friend who introduced me to the idea of compassionate eating, i.e. not killing and eating animals. And it was the first moment in my life I had a thought about that. And it was one of those epic aha moments from which I could never turn back, really. And I think that was the case for most people at that time taking that route, whereas I know now that there are many different reasons why people adopt a plant-based diet.
You were also, this is really interesting, you were one of the first female DJs in the UK. Tell me more.
It's my dark and mysterious past. Well, you know, I was born in the mid-60s, and by the time I left college, it was the mid-80s. And sort of between the mid-80s and the mid-90s, that's when that whole warehouse party scene just exploded. Started in warehouses and it evolved into house, then trance, techno, and all of that. And I was actually working in the radio, much like yourself. I loved radio. I was a member of a local community radio in Cambridge. Started hosting music programs because I also loved music. Dance music was just starting to happen at that time. We had DJs coming in to play music on my radio show, and I remember thinking, I'm sure I could do that. So I basically did. I started DJing, and back then, you know, no one spent months, years in their bedroom perfecting the art. We were literally out there on the coalface. I did my first gigs playing live, you know, without any practice at all. So it was a fast track, really. But then as the scene evolved, you know, that evolved into quite a nice scene. Parties, festivals all over the world, and it became my career for about 10 years.
Wow. And what made you think about opening restaurants and a chain of restaurants?
One thing sort of led to another, I suppose. I mean, I had another business, actually. So after my DJing career, so as you get older, you have many lives within a life. And as the DJing sort of moved on, I was very much into yoga from childhood as well. Vegetarianism is kind of very much a part of that path, actually, as well. And I actually built a multi-site yoga business. And the food business sort of evolved through that, really. I was always trying to make that work in the yoga business, to provide vegan food for our yoga students. And then eventually it just evolved into a thing in its own right, and the right place turned up at the right time. And hey presto, STEM and Glory was born.
Wow. Tell me, in your opinion, why is it important to be vegan?
Well, I mean, like I've mentioned already, for me, it's for the animals. I still, this might be slightly controversial, when I see people eating meat, I still don't understand how they can reconcile that in their own minds. But I think some people don't actually think about it, and I think that's why they continue to do it and ignore, perhaps that it's much more ethical not to eat other animals. But I do think now that the reasons, the environmental reasons for eating more plant-based food, if not an exclusively plant-based diet, are becoming increasingly compelling. And I do think whatever you think about the animals argument, whatever you think about the health arguments, you can't deny the sustainability edge to this now. So it's everybody's responsibility, even if you don't go 100% vegan, just go more plant-based and more in a vegan direction. And most of the people I know are actually doing that right now.
And what do you say to people who say vegan food is not tasty?
Come to our restaurant.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, honestly, the whole reason, well, you asked me why I started it, but actually the whole motivating factor is that I've spent 35 years trying to find a decent vegan restaurant meal. When I was younger, I mean, it was basically the vegan option was the vegetarian option with the cheese removed, and without any attention to any flavor. There was no addition of anything. Nobody had a clue how to make vegan food. They would look at you like you were a freak. But from my own experience of cooking plant-based foods for so many years, I know that's not true. That's not necessarily the case. So it's not just a case of putting several vegan things on a plate and there's your vegan meal. You have to attend to layers of flavor, different ways of processing, using high umami ingredients, things that have got that real flavor bomb taste. So, yeah, I mean, I know that it can be done. I wish more people would spend a bit more time doing it. I think people are spending more time creating more delicious vegan food, but I do still think there's a long way to go. Not at Stem and Glory, of course.
No, but here at Helen Duran, we have a really tasty vegan meal every lunch.
Yeah,
so
good.
I can vouch for that. How would you say, how popular is vegan food in the world today?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think I was talking to someone earlier this week who owns an Italian restaurant, not vegan, but there are cuisines all over the world where vegan food is. I mean, Asian food, for example, they do now, but it's not built around dairy foods, for example. So they do have like Thailand, for example. One of my favorite dishes like som tam can be made vegan very, very easily. They use a lot of fish sauce in Thailand, but that's not the main sort of flavor of the dish, And, there are many like curries, which are vegetarian, lots of Italian dishes, which are vegetarian. So vegan restaurants, vegan cuisine is still quite niche, as are vegan people. But a lot of people eat a lot of vegan food all the time without thinking about it. And it's been like that since the beginning of time. So yeah, when people say, oh, I couldn't go vegan, I'm like, well, you're probably eating quite a lot of vegan food all the time. So I think it's just about taking that little extra step, really. You can veganize most things. Most cuisines can be veganized, like the som tam example. You just replace, you can actually get vegetarian fish sauce now. So you just replace that with that and the dish is just as good.
And I mean, I can see, I travel around Europe quite a lot, and everywhere I go, there are so many more vegan restaurants around and easily available to eat vegan food than it was like 20 years ago.
It's definitely easier. I still think there's a long, long way to go, though. I mean, obviously, I haven't traveled recently, but I mean, there are some kind of notable capitals in the world. Amsterdam, for example, is very good. They've got a lot of vegan places there. London is quite good, but still, there's not that many places like us doing kind of more contemporary dining. I think there's a lot of vegan junk food around, which is great. And vegan junk food definitely plays a big part in converting people towards veganism. But in terms of contemporary cuisine, which is where we are, it's still quite few and far between. And the further you go away from big cities as well, it gets worse.
How do you suggest, if our teen listeners are thinking of becoming vegan, how would they go about it?
Well, I have 2 teenage children who have been raised vegan/vegetarian. One thing that they both experienced, especially when they got to secondary school, is children often don't like to set themselves apart too much from their peers. So I do think that can be a factor. But I do see in my children's generation a lot more people adopting a vegan diet now. I think in terms of now and in the next 5 years, I think we're going to see a huge increase in the number of young vegans, and we definitely see that in our restaurants as well. We do some catering gigs sometimes, and when it's a younger audience, it's almost every other person is vegan. The older age groups is less so, I think, now.
So that bodes really well for the planet, basically.
It does, and I do think that's a really key motivating factor with young people. Sorry, in answer to your question, what's the advice for going about it? Is basically just do it and put up with the questions, because everybody's got. One of my children, my youngest, she's just turned 15, and they do get singled out in school, but just honestly stand by your principles, put up with these people just making stupid remarks. It's going to carry on like that. You may as well just accept it now. Everybody's got something to say on the topic, but I think one of the reasons people will try to do you down or make out it's stupid or not right, or is they have their own internal guilt running. And that's something I've seen later in life. People will create a narrative to suit their own agenda. And people have been brought up, their parents have brought them up eating meat and dairy products, and they somehow feel the need to have to justify that. And meeting you, who's made a decision to go vegan, will trigger all those things in them. So try and look at it from a different perspective and stand by your guns. And for every one person who won't accept it in you, another 5 will accept it in you.
Wow, that's great advice. And it was fantastic talking to you. Thank you very much, Louise Palmer Masterton from STEM and Glory Restaurant.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.